Okay, so we've done quite a bit of reading and stuff, and the aspect of it with which I'm very familiar is the CLA performance task. I've been to their workshops, which is an authentic assessment, and we'll talk about that at the end because we'll use that as a sample to work through. But given that, so objectives for today are to introduce you to the idea of authentic assessment, talk about what it is, how to define it, what it isn't, and give you some ideas about ways to integrate authentic assessment into your classwork. So, there we go. At any point, please stop and ask questions if you have them. So this is just a nice quote. Tell me I forget, teach me I remember, involve me, and I learn. So it's kind of a poster for authentic assessment and authentic tasks, as we'll talk. So there are two experts in the field. As you read on it, two names come out. Brant Wiggins is one of them, and Fred Newman. This is accurate, isn't it? Fred Newman, different Fred Newman. Anyway, Fred Newman are two authors that you'll see that talk extensively about and write extensively and research extensively about authentic assessment. So his definition is engaging in worthy problems or questions of importance in which students must use knowledge to fashion performances effectively and creatively. So it's pretty broad design. The tasks are either replicas of or analogous to the kinds of problems faced by adult citizens and consumers or professionals in the field. I have all the sources at the end of the PowerPoint, any of these I think that you're interested in. So, an authentic task, so we'll talk a little bit about tasks, learning strategies, and authentic assessments can be used interchangeably. A lot of times, whether they're a formative sort of a thing or more of a summative task. So generally, we ask students to perform. A task is authentic when students are asked to construct their own responses rather than select one from one presented. And the task replicates challenges faced in the real world, and it's typically multidimensional. So a lot of times tests have one very narrow focus, a very specific outcome that they're addressing. Authentic assessment tries to bring in various aspects of things. So two examples, just quickly. So golfing, when students are learning to golf, you may give them a written test about what's the equipment, what are the rules, right? But if you really want to authentically assess how they golf, you're going to take them out to the golf course, right? So that's a very simple sort of authentic assessment. Not only are they trying to hit off the tee, but they're looking at the lay. They may have weather problems that they have to counter. It may be windy. So there are these multidimensional things, multidimensional aspects to it that you can't test on a test. First aid is another one. Students can know what are the steps to take when somebody's got a broken leg? How do I triage a set of patients? Actually getting in the field and doing it and being a first aid provider for somebody is more authentic, it's real world, it's dirty, it's messy.
And I'll stick with my numbers.
Okay, so when we look at the difference here between traditional assessment and an authentic test, we see it's really a continuum. When we look at something, it's not either one or the other, somewhere along the continuum. So we have traditional, and on the other end is authentic. Traditional assessments is select a response, multiple choice. What's the right answer? At the other end is perform a task. So identify the components of a golf game, whatever, the equipment for a golf game, shows how you can play golf. Okay, and there's a lot of things in between, right? So there's a continuum. Traditional assessment is a little bit more contrived. You're thinking of questions and things that replicate, but again, they're contrived. Never in real life are we hit with a situation where we say, pick one of the four, right, to do. Which is the best answer? All right, so authentic is more real life. Traditional assessment asks our students to recall, recognize. When we think of Bloom's taxonomy, they're usually the lower quadrants, knowledge, things like that. Authentic assessment is more along the higher range of Bloom's taxonomy, where students are constructing, they're doing application, they're evaluating, creating. Traditional assessment is more teacher structured. Authentic assessment is more student structured, student focused. I have a little bit of heartburn when they use this terminology because we use indirect and direct in a little bit different way, but according to Mueller, traditional assessment is really indirect evidence of what a student knows. Authentic is more direct evidence of what a student knows. So you may be able to remember things on a test. Actually applying them is a different sort of aspect. Okay, so selected response. Lots of things we have. We have multiple choice tests, we have true and false, matching, fill in the blank. Here's a diagram, label the things on the areas on a diagram. Areas on a diagram. Then we have constructed response. There's product-like one, so provide a short essay to this question. Develop a concept map that illustrates your mastery of the topic. Identify a theme, given a paragraph. Given some situation information, can you predict what may happen next? Or read this and summarize. So they're constructed responses, students are given prompts, they think and go through. Or they're performance-like responses that are also considered constructed. So in a foreign language, you may be asked to read a paragraph. Are you reading it fluently? You may take a typing test. How fast can you type? Solve a problem. Create a dance. Given these parameters, on the fly, create a dance. So these are sort of constructed response ideas. Then we move up. We've got actual full performances and projects, which are then now considered more authentic assessment. So you can see it is kind of a continuum that flows through. So some of the basic elements of an authentic assessment: students are asked to develop responses rather than choose from a list of possibly correct answers. So multiple choice, true, false, sort of types of things. Authentic assessment tends to foster higher order thinking. Hopefully it aligns with classroom instruction. So here's the principles. I'm going to give you a theory. Now we're going to apply it in class. It may use student work that is collected over time. So e-portfolios are an example of authentic assessment. We're collecting student work, evaluating it over time, or the students are evaluating over time, looking for their growth, areas where they've learned or areas where they're having trouble with. It's based on clear criteria given to students. So when we talk about grading authentic assessment, rubrics become very important. One of the fun aspects of authentic assessment is that there are multiple interpretations. Generally, there's no right or wrong answer. You're given evidence, you do things, and you create it. It isn't that the goal isn't to arrive at the right answer. The goal is to go through the process. Use what you can to support your claim, your conclusion at the end. And then through authentic assessment, students will learn to evaluate their own work. So they produce what you've asked them to produce. They look at it, and they can look at it themselves in comparison to others in the class. They can see where they stand. They can look at it and figure out, oh, let's try this. Let's go back to this. Let's correct this.
Gail, if you have students, having students evaluate their own work at the end of a semester and having them say, yes, I think I deserve this, or I think I deserve that, is there any research that would say that students are more, well, I just read some research this morning that said that students who are poor students have a very false hope of getting a good grade, and people and students who have higher grades actually are more realistic.
Critical of themselves. I don't know of the research. It sounds like it makes sense. Have you heard of anything like that? I think that's why the better students are better students, because they're better able at self-analyzing.
Right. I just wonder if I had, for example, let's say I do an e-portfolio, which I do, in 4990, and if I had the students evaluate maybe theirs and maybe the portfolios of others, what does that?
I think they contribute. Students learn a lot from each other, that peer review process, especially if that's done on more of a formative basis. Turn it into your peers, let your peers evaluate, give you feedback, make changes to your portfolio based on your peer feedback. And it would be different at a 4990 level than it would be at a 1000 or 2000 level. I think by the time you get to that area, students are probably a little more clear about what is good and what isn't. and a little more realistic about their own capabilities.
Okay.
Anybody else have ideas about that?
So I do video production, and so a lot of the classes that I take is full-on authentic assessment because we have to do hands-on resources. We have to do the filming, we have to do the editing, and then we show it to our peers, and then we critique it or say we like this and we didn't like that. And I think success sells success in a lot of places. The places where, you know, a test, although I'm not a good test taker, but I'm a great life applying. You know, I can do a lot of applying of what it needs to happen when it comes down to that moment. And I think that, and sometimes it's just the way they process the information. You know, some people process it much easier through written, you know, papers and looking at it. But students, for me at least, I feel like as a student, seeing that having teachers give me some sort of life application helps me a ton more than anything else.
Good. And when you say you peer review, how do you, just in response to Colleen's question, do you get good feedback from your peer review?
It's up in the air sometimes. Okay. So there's some people who just kind of say yes, and then there's some people who are there. I think the people who care about what they're doing give the critical feedback that I want, and those who kind of are half there will give half the information and feedback you want.
Another good point you raised, authentic assessment, one of the advantages of incorporating authentic assessment in your classroom is some students are not good test takers. It gives them another opportunity to show their mastery, to show that they have learned achieved your learning outcomes. It just gives them another chance. Another good point is some areas are more conducive to authentic assessment. I mean, the ideas are just, limitless. Video production, dance, the creative sort of things. Other areas, accounting, though I can still see a lot of real-world application, it's a little bit harder to come up with those authentic assessments in the classroom, I think.
Yeah.
Bottom line, authentic assessment seems to make sense to students. They get it. They're able to make the connection between the course objectives, the learning tasks that you've set out for them. They can pull it all together, and again, it's that iterative process where they try something, they get feedback, they fix it. It just seems to resonate with students. So, when we talk about authentic assessment as this great thing, are we saying that traditional assessment is bad? It's no. We're not saying it's wrong, we're not saying it's bad. Authentic assessment is simply another option. Traditional assessment is really important to allow us to monitor performance. Are they getting the basic ideas? Are they developing the vocabulary that they need? Do they understand the basic concepts? Traditional assessment is a very efficient form of assessment. We don't love multiple choice, but sometimes it's the best way to figure out if students are getting it, especially those lower level of Bloom's taxonomy sort of things where they just need to gain the initial knowledge. Traditional assessment is really good at doing that. It can be used formatively, so you can allow your students to take tests, retake tests till they get it, and you can use the same sort of thing summatively. This is it, this is the end of the semester, what you get is what you get. Authentic assessment should support improved performance, so students do something, create something, learn through the process a lot of times, because it can be really messy sometimes, some authentic assessment. Tasks are sometimes ill-structured purposefully. So students have to think, and I know it frustrates some students when one of the ones that I use in my class is, give me more direction. It's like, no, that's part of the exercise, you figure it out. So it's good, but it can be frustrating. But it does help them rehearse for some of those real life sort of situations. Life is not simple, there's a lot of complexity to it. And it's meant to focus on the impact of one's work in real world, realistic contexts. Okay, so there's got to be a catch, right? So developing good authentic assessments is very labor intensive. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of thought to put them together. They're time consuming to develop, and they can take up a good part of your students' time as well. They're time consuming to complete. It is a judgment, so you're using rubrics, but you're still making judgment. on performance. Different people may interpret the results very differently, so again, using a good rubric should help to address some of those issues. So why bother? We've already pointed out it takes a lot of time to create, but it helps students to use the acquired knowledge, so they're learning their accounting skills, they're learning how to, the principles of communication allows them to actually use these and show that you can use them. Authentic assessment embraces kind of that constructive sort of learning aspect. A lot of us learn as we do, to put the pieces together. It just helps cement the theory that we're learning with the application. Better integrates assessment with teaching and learning. Traditionally, when we use assessment, we do the teaching, the students do the learning, and then separately out here we do the assessment. Authentic assessment ideally integrates all of it, so it's all happening at once. It's not considered something separate. The bottom line is really critical. Authentic assessment provides multiple paths to demonstrate mastery of concepts. Students have different opportunities. Again, if they're not good at writing essays, if they're not good at writing papers, if you can create something, construct something, they might have another opportunity to illustrate mastery. So, lots of different authentic assessment out there that people can do. Can you come up with some examples of what might be considered authentic in your fields?
Well, for me, my students having to do, you have to do a LinkedIn account and an e-portfolio.
Okay.
I think those are pretty authentic.
The goal being to learn to market themselves?
Yeah, exactly. They have to do their, sort of for some branding
Okay.
things, yeah.
Okay, good.
You know, I'm looking at the authentic tasks, and I think I have a lot of authentic tasks within my structure of my classes.
Okay.
In the sense where we talk about a concept,
Mm-hmm.
and then they have buddy exercises.
Okay.
So they get into buddies, and so they're actually constructing and applying what we talked about, kind of a little smaller with somebody else. So they're teaching each other, but they're also constructing their own responses. It can take in the concepts that we're learning. So that's how I chunk up my huge lectures,
Okay.
by talking a little and then applying
Oh, great.
and getting the hands-on, but then it says involve me and I'll learn, that they're actually saying, oh, now I understand how I'm applying this.
Okay.
But, they're given, a case or a situation,
Right.
and then they have to go ahead and think through it. But I want them to be involved in thinking critically too.
Okay.
But I mean, that's more a task. I'm not assessing them. It's not like they're given a grade on anything, because they actually keep them, and I don't see what they've worked on.
Okay.
But what's at stake is I can call on people throughout the class and say, we can talk about it.
Okay, and so they're kind of developing a portfolio of these things almost as they go through your course?
Well, they're just keeping all of them on the different topics.
Okay,
So
we'll
not
call that a
develop-
portfolio.
Okay.
No worries. Okay, but they've got a collection of things that they can refer back to and use.
Yes, and then actually the exam that I develop is based on all of the stuff that we've lectured on and handouts and the buddy exercises, and I have small group assignments where they get their groups and they actually do something.
Okay, so you're using those authentic tasks to help them develop review materials?
Yes, yes.
Great.
For the exam.
Good. Tell me your name.
I'm Janelle.
Janelle,
Gardner.
Gardner, sorry.
It's okay. I'm the director for therapy.
Okay.
And I can think of one that I do where I lecture and teach them about the components of a good pulmonary rehab program,
Okay.
but then I have them design their own program that meets all the requirements
Oh,
and implements the components of a good, successful pulmonary rehab.
And then how do they peer rate each other? Do you have a rubric that you use? How do you
I have a
evaluate?
rubric.
Okay.
But they actually create, and they can choose how they do it. They can create a brochure, they can create a sales pitch presentation for their pulmonary rehab program. They can design a little module that they would show this is how the classes are gonna work for the components of my pulmonary rehab. So there's lots of different ways, and they can kind of choose. They have a certain number of requirements, obviously through the rubric, but they kind of have a little bit of freedom to.
So it's that ill-structured aspect of it that lets them.
Yep. And I have had someone come to me and say, what are you looking for? And I'm like, it's up to you.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the good part about, I mean, you can see what's behind the rubric. The rest of it is really your choosing.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting how some students just embrace that, and others it just freaks them out. It's
Yeah.
like, I want, give me guidelines.
Yeah.
And others just take off with it. Heather, do you have any sort of?
Sure, I use authentic assessment all the time in my stats classes, so I teach statistics, and really, I'm not interested that the students can regurgitate back to me. There are aspects I'm interested in their regurgitation on, but for the most part, I want them to be able to, when they go out, I want them to be able to pick something up and know what the people are talking about. I want to be able to know how to run an analysis. I want to be able to know those things, and so for me, everything that we do is authentic. That's not true. We have some of the more traditional things, but every problem that I give them on homework is, here's a data set, here's your hypothesis, here are the things I want you to cover, go figure it out. And we do it throughout the semester on all of their homeworks, and then it's mimicked in their quizzes, so that it's the same format on their quizzes. And then it gives me an opportunity to provide them with feedback and say, or I use it also formatively, so it provides me with feedback that everybody's missing this concept, there's something that I need to put more information on. And then it builds to our last quiz, where it's literally, here is a data set, go build a hypothesis, test it, include all the pieces that you need, and that's your, that's your final test. So.
And we've talked a little bit, some of the stats classes I had, for the grad program, I knew how to run t-tests, I knew how to run ANOVAs, I knew how to run regression. I didn't know when to use them. They covered how to run them, but I didn't get the real world, here's this muddy situation, figure out what's best to use. I still can't do it, and I struggle with that. But we miss that authentic piece, and part of it is there's so much that you have to get through in a semester, and these do take time. How do you fit them in? So what I'm going to walk you through is the CLA is the Collegiate Learning Assessment. It's an assessment we subscribe to. We give here on campus. Colleen students take it in the spring, and they call it a performance test. So it's an assessment that's given to freshmen in the fall, we give it to seniors in the spring. The primary aspect of it is called their performance task, and it's one example of an authentic assessment. But I think it's a fairly good program. I'll walk through how they've done it. I've gone to some of their workshops, so I'm pretty familiar with it, and I've developed one for my own class. I have a handout, but the print is so tiny, so small that it's pretty much useless. I won't bother to hand it out, but I did include the worksheet here. Give you an idea.
I love stuff like this, because I'm just sitting here thinking, it's like, how can I change what I'm doing? Because unfortunately in accounting, it's a lot of it's just the traditional,
Right.
Because that's what the CPA exam is. Can you recall and,
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily reflect what they're gonna do out in the real world. So I'm just showing you, this is here for you to work, and it kind of walks you through some of the aspects of it, so I'll make sure you have access to that. Whoops. I don't know how to go backwards on here.
I do want to share, I do have them do something that is in the real world while you're doing the
Okay,
slides.
thanks.
We have a case that they research a case, and it says answer A, B, and C, and I tell them to answer it as A, B, and C, but you have to write an actual communication to a client. Say, and restate the synopsis, and do a synopsis of it, so the client understands you know what they're talking about. I understand your situation is X, Y, and Z, and you're trying to figure out how to do it, and then they research, and then they go back and not only tell them what they found in their research, but apply it to the client. And sometimes they get stuck in the whole, this is what I found. It's like, well, wait a minute, you just left me hanging, what are we supposed to do as a
Yeah.
client?
Yeah.
So they struggle with those. And I use Canvas, and I have turn it in and submit it, and I also have them put their name on it, and I have a rubric.
Oh, okay.
And I actually go through and grade them on the different criteria. But they get a lot of feedback, and it's great for them to do something this is what they're going to do. You have a client that has a situation, and don't just research it and tell them what you found, but apply it.
Yeah,
Don't leave them hanging.
Right.
You know, because now I have this business, what do you recommend I do?
Yeah. So this kind of assessment actually ties in nicely with that. So the way they construct the performance analysis, the performance test, so it's set up to assess analysis, problem solving, writing effectiveness, and writing mechanics. Students are given a couple open-ended questions in a hypothetical situation. So the basic components are a scenario. So they provide a story for the student.
I led this in perfectly. I did this just for you.
Okay. The student takes on a role, a specific role. They're given a task, and then they're given this document library. And as you go through the process of creating these scenarios, that's the biggest challenge, is creating this document library that they use then to answer the questions. So for the class, I teach the Wired Society sometimes, which is IT related. So here's my scenario. So I've got a person who works at a school. No, this is a different one. This is an example from them, sorry. So here's the scenario. Dr. Eager said that Mayor Stone's proposal for reducing crime by increasing the number of police officers is a bad idea. So this is a city council sort of thing. Dr. Eager says increasing the number of police officers will only lead to more crime. And I can show you the data that says that the more police officers we have, the more crime. It says, so Dr. Eager supported his argument with a chart that shows that counties with relatively large numbers of police officers per resident tend to have more crime than those with fewer officers per resident. So think about that for a second. At some point you go, well, duh, of course, but he's spinning it. Secondly, Dr. Eager says we should take the money that would have gone to hiring more police officers and spend it on this drug program, because I can show you how this drug program is actually better. He supported the argument by referring to a news release by the Washington Institute for Social Research that describes the effectiveness of the drug program. He also said there were other scientific studies that showed the program was very effective. So you can picture all the documentation that they're providing to support this argument. Third, Dr. Eager said that because of the strong correlation between drug use and crime in Jefferson, and he's got the data to support that, reducing the number of addicts would lower the city's crime rate. So we've got two competing proposals for resources. One says beef up police officers, the other says invest in this drug program. So the student's job, their role is to look at both arguments, figure out which is the best, and make a recommendation. Okay, so they've got the scenario, they've got their role, they've got their task, and then they've got their supporting document. Okay, so this is the individual making, so you can define the role, quite clearly for what the person is supposed to do. So there's going to be a debate, and you have to release a report evaluating the claims. So you look at all this documentation and make a recommendation. Who are you going to support? So the document library may contain a memorandum outlining the mayor's proposal, various data compilations. So we've got the report of drug use and crime in Jefferson. We've got a chart showing correlation between crime rate and number of officers by county. We see the study of the effectiveness of the treatment program. Then it also includes an article from the local paper about the rise in drug-related crime. So you can see there's data here of varying quality. There's maybe an op-ed from the paper. There's actual data from an institute. There's maybe some data that's been spun to try to give an impression that is not necessarily true. The student's task then is to read through the scenario from their assigned role and use the documentation to develop a sound argument. Then they write up a recommendation. So the writing effectiveness is a memo. So what they produce in this case isn't huge. It's not too onerous to grade. But it's a memo that, if done well, will show how they support it. There's no right or wrong answer. So it isn't that Dr. Eager or Mayor Stone is the right one. It's whatever the student decides is the most compelling evidence and how they write up the argument. And so that's kind of the gist of the performance test that CLA does. So the students, when they come in to take the CLA, they have an hour. They're given the scenarios, they're given all the background information, then they're given a document library that they can go through and use. So the performance test evaluates whether evidence is credible or unreliable. So the statistic that said that as police rates go up, crime rates go up, really there's an intervening variable here, and it's population size, right? That really, and whether students can get that, or whether they look at that data literally. So that if they include that in the argument, or they discount it in their memo, that gives you an idea if they understand that idea. Provides an opportunity for them to analyze and synthesize the evidence, allows them to draw conclusions. Again, right or wrong, because how they support them. A good performance task response is well organized and logically developed, so there's writing components to it. And then show how well it's written. So these are how the CLAs are all evaluated. And they've got very elaborate rubrics that you can use for most of the performance tasks that they make available. Any questions on
When
that?
students take that assessment, then they do that in an hour?
They do that in an hour. They have an hour to do that. Yeah. Yeah. So it's.
Could you do that in an hour, Colleen?
I don't know if I could do it in an hour. I guess I could. I mean, I knew what side I would go on just because of
That.
because
Yeah.
of the
Yeah. And that's
information
one
I
of
had.
their scenarios.
Yeah.
I didn't make that one up. That's from theirs.
I guess.
And you can go take it if you want. You can. A lot of instructors, a couple of instructors have wanted to take it. So
See about that.
the document I showed you, which is a worksheet that allows you to go through and kind of go through these things. So the one I've done in my class, so I teach, so it's an IT related, and in my class we talk about how technology diffuses or doesn't, through a society. We talk about the different factors. We use the S-curve, where there's kind of that quick and slow adoption at first, that accelerated adoption when the majority of people, and then it tapers off. So the scenario I give them is that they're an IT person at a school, and they've been given a grant, and the teachers at the school have all submitted two proposals that they have to consider. So one instructor wants to buy very specialized software that's needed in the community. The skills for that software are needed in the community, but it can probably only reach 10% of the students in the school. The other professor wants to buy software that's kind of old, but everyone needs it because it's a lower socioeconomic school. They don't have access to it at home. So they've got two competing arguments. One that will impact a few students, but greatly, and one that impact a lot of students, not as greatly. So they just work through the evidence that's provided, and they make a conclusion. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just whether you can support, your conclusion. So they're kind of fun to work through. CLA actually sponsors 2-day workshops where you can sit down and work through groups. What I think would be really fun is if, as we develop authentic assessments, if we could collect what people do for these and share them. Because they do take some time to develop, and sometimes you can adopt one and just tweak it a little bit for your own areas. Anyway, these are the sources for most of the authentic assessment information that I used here. And that's what I have. Any ideas, any questions? Are you thinking of ways that you might be able to incorporate this? Got some good examples.
I think it's interesting, just as a student, when students struggle with the fact that you give them this authentic, they struggle with that direction. I think it's because there's been a lack of that. They don't see. It's hard for many students to see where the connection is from what they're learning to what they're going to do in real life situations.
Yeah.
And so having these assessments are super. So, because I run a crew, and they've for the studio downstairs, and all of them have taken, most of them, actually all of them have taken the essentials class, the basic class, and yet time and time again we have to discuss, say, okay, remember the basics of what you've learned, and okay, and apply it and make sure you're improving what you've learned on.
Right.
And so I think it's useful.
Right. Yeah, and if it gives you an opportunity to repeat those things that you learned early on, that if you don't repeat them, you lose them. If you can incorporate those, it just kind of ingrains them a little bit more into the neural paths or whatever. Yeah, from a
these be used in gen ed assessment? Let me give you an example. For public speaking, rather than do the old quiz questions that we've got right now, I mean, I'm thinking, why not do an authentic assessment where everybody is given their document library and they have to prepare a speech for a certain audience, for a certain thing? I mean, give them the scenario.
I think it'd be great.
How would that, but okay, but here's
The gotcha.
the gotcha part. How do you authentically assess the assessment? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's what the researchers pointed out, that is the challenge, even though you have a rubric.
Right.
It's still hard, and one person may evaluate differently than another person, so that full
Right.
narrator reliability. But the process, so I think it's a great idea. It's very labor intensive, but if over semesters, you could build several of these libraries, and then you just hand them out
Right.
to students. So yeah, again, it's a great idea, it just takes more time. And you're hit, with gen ed, you have more of those students who are new, who are used to coming from high school, being told exactly what to produce.
Right.
Do this, you know. And it's one of the drawbacks, I love rubrics, but one of the drawbacks of rubrics, I think, is that sometimes it limits a student to how, you know, if all they do is follow the rubric, you kind of lose some of that serendipitous sort of creation that would occur if you didn't have a rubric. So you hate to see a limit what students produce.
Okay.
But yeah, you'd have to, I guess it would take practice, right, to be able to. But you could use peer
Gen ed
review too.
itself, we wouldn't have to do every single student. Couldn't we do a sample of
Absolutely.
everybody?
Sample of everybody?
Well, I mean, you know, as,
One
Yeah.
course, 2 courses a semester.
Yeah. Yeah, because you're probably not gonna get everybody on board.
oh, hell no.
Cut that on the.
That is, oh, sorry.
You're being recorded.
Yeah, but the
No.
few people that would do it, that would be really fun to do.
I
Yeah,
think
develop
it'd be
those scenarios.
super fun.
Yeah. And these guys, actually, the people who lead these CLA workshops, they're really good at this, and they'll actually come. So if your department is interested, you can hire them to come for a day and work through these, develop several of those scenarios that you could then pull out and use. Okay. And there is lots of other authentic assessment that I haven't talked about. So like problem-based learning, you know, John Armstrong, I know, is really big on that. He started to implement that in his physics class. That's a form of authentic assessment. Students are presented with a real-world problem, and they work on it throughout the semester. Problem-based learning, what else is there? I mean, there's just lots of different types.
Like when we do simulations.
Exactly, simulations, yeah.
We do that all the time.
Yeah. A lot of, in health professions, they've got the
Yeah.
mannequins and things like that, very authentic. I mean, it makes sounds, right?
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Exactly.
In our lower division 2010, myself, I've implemented, and my other instructors have implemented a comprehensive annual report project.
Oh,
We're taking all the concepts we're learning throughout the semester, and they're getting these AR 1 through 10, so throughout the semester, so there's 10 chapters, so there's different little handouts that they get. And so if we're learning about a certain concept in that chapter, then we have these 5 questions that we actually pose to them, and they actually have to go to an annual report of a public company that they've picked. Maybe it's somebody they love, or a hobby, or somewhere they shop, and they have to actually dig in and go into the real world of saying, okay, how is it what we're learning apply
yeah.
to some real world stuff?
Yeah, and what can you learn about that company based upon what you just learned in class, yeah. Yeah. So there are a lot, again, they're a little more time intensive, but tend to be pretty effective.
But they look for more guidance. It's like, well, how, it's supposed to be a written report, and, well, do you want us to answer 1, 2, 3? No, go through and, answer these questions and talk about, okay, this is what they produce, this company, and this is their sources of revenue, and maybe, where are they located, and if they're worldwide, and then we start digging into the details of it all.
Yeah, so that may, that may
There's
be,
not, there's not a huge amount of, there's limited
yeah,
guidance,
exactly.
but it allows for them to really be creative and go in and, whatever they want.
Yeah, and that may be the biggest challenge, is getting students over that. And I guess you do it by making sure that they're not penalized by thinking out of the box too much, right? No, you can't say, do what you want, and then come back and say, no, you were supposed to do this.
Well, we gave them guidelines,
Yeah,
and
so
definite
it's
format,
all done,
you
yeah.
know, and make sure that the sections are identified, so we know what to address and everything. The charts and graphs and written stuff in.
And I would imagine already, I think a lot of instructors already do this, especially as students move through their curriculums. And the senior seminar and capstone sort of being much more athletic, I think, than what you get at 1,000, 2,000 levels. All right.